This session is When Diversity Training Isn't Enough, UNC Charlotte's DEI Education Hub. And I'll hand it over to Angel, Christin, and Adreonna now.
Thank you, Devin. I am going to share my screen. And while I do that, I just want to say thanks to NC Live for this chance to present this workshop. We previously presented at the NC Live conference. And so this is a little bit of a follow-up. And instead of us kind of talking to you and presenting information with very little time for questions, we wanted to try to make this into a workshop that is around our work and how you can implement it in your library or your personal life or wherever you see that this fits. So I should say, my name is Angel Truesdale. I'm the Social Sciences and Business Librarian here at UNC Charlotte's J. Mary Atkins Library, and I go by she, her pronouns.
And I'm Adreonna Bennett. I'm the Community Engagement Archivist at Atkins Library, and I also go by she, her pronouns.
And I'm Christin Lampkowski. I'm the Technology and Digital Strategies Assistant at Atkins Library. I work in our technology spaces, and I also use she, her pronouns.
You're on mute, Angel. Angel, you're on mute.
Hey, Angel, you're muted. Yeah.
So sorry, y'all. Before we get started with the presentation, I would love to share an acknowledgement that some of the folks on our committee and across our library and campus actually devised. So we would like to honor the land that UNC Charlotte and the city of Charlotte inhabits. So the University of North Carolina, Charlotte is located on the traditional territories of the Catawba, Waxhaw, Cheraw, Wateree, and Sugaree peoples. And as many of us are settlers, migrants, or descendants of those forcibly brought to this land, we are here because this land is colonized. I ask you to join me in acknowledging the Catawba, Cheraw, Sugaree, Wateree, and Waxhaw peoples community, their elders, both past and present, as well as future generations. Thank you for being with us today. We hope you'll accept this invitation to honor, protect, and sustain this land and all of Turtle Island through shared knowledge and support for the Catawba, Cheraw, and many other Indigenous communities who continue to thrive here today. All right. So here's a little bit of our agenda here today. We're going to talk a little bit about our committee work and the things that we're doing here at UNC Charlotte Atkins Library. Then we'll take a little bit of a deeper dive into the programs that we implement, and then how we have integrated those programs into our education hub. And then at the end, like I said, we have kind of transitioned our previous presentation into this workshop. We're going to have some prompt questions that we're going to ask you throughout. We're going to have them all on a slide at the end that you can discuss in the breakout room. So we have a lot of engagement for this workshop. So hopefully you will feel free to unmute yourselves or type in the chat when you see fit. All right, so before we get into the detail of our work, I did want to share this guiding principle that we have really embodied in all the work that we've done. This wasn't apparent when we set up. We didn't say like, oh, we're going to use guiding our culture humility as our guiding principle, and this is what we're going to follow. But as we did a little bit more research, we kind of discovered this term, and I saw a webinar, and we just thought, oh, this was a great elevation of cultural competency. Cultural competency was a part of one of our initial goals, but we also had this ambition to move beyond awareness, and we wanted to try to integrate this work really in people's work lives, you know, and personal lives, if that's possible. So the major tenets that we feel like we implement in our work here is a lifelong commitment to self-evaluation and self-critique. So at every point, we're trying to inspire reflection and other action that you can do within some of the DEIA topics that we explore. We have a desire to fix power imbalances. We regularly call out how white supremacy and other discrimination has affected our lives and how it can affect anyone, even if they're at the circulation desk, right? And then we aspire to develop partnerships with people and groups who advocate for others. So you'll hear a little bit about that later, but we're not trying to go this alone. We are trying to do this in tandem with other people. And I mentioned earlier that our land acknowledgement was not only devised by people in the library, but other scholars on our campus that could speak a little bit more to being a little bit more sensitive, but also being aware and empowering to the people of the land that we are on. And then I just want to say lastly that be on the lookout, there are now 2 books that are going to explore cultural humility in libraries. When we presented just 2 months ago, there was 1 book coming out and now there's 2. So I would definitely look out for that if you want more information. All right. So just a little bit on our work here at UNC Charlotte, Atkins. So we're, again, not going this alone. We do have an organizational culture. We are the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Subcommittee, which means we have a larger committee, Diversity and Inclusion Committee, that we work under. We're one of 3 subcommittees, and we also even have a work group or 2 that works on different things. Our newest work group is actually a team of people to work on different statements of support for different groups on campus or in our community, whether that's here in Charlotte or otherwise. We took some brainstorming activities and we took them and made them into action. So our first couple of meetings, we actually just did a couple of brainstorming activities where we used a Post-it note activity. We used a couple other things to kind of devise this workshop of our goals, potential programs, things that we saw needed to be addressed, or at least, we could explore in some way or another. So speaking of that worksheet, that actually leads me into the next part about our community tools. So that worksheet is a tool. We try to link that in every agenda for our meetings so that people can be inspired by our goals that we set in 2019 when we started. But we also, around the same time that our committee was started, the library also devised a diversity statement. So some of the things that are in that diversity statement, the commitments we made, we try to imbue into our programs as well and our work. One of our committee members who's amazing started this really large spreadsheet of observances for different cultural events and milestones. So we're in Pride Month, we're at the end of Pride Month. June is also Black Music Month. So if you've enjoyed some Black music this month, hopefully you were aware that that is a thing. So it also could just be, a day observance, right? We just got through, oh my gosh, it's leaving my mind, but like Memorial Day, different things like that. That could be a day or even a week-long celebration of a culture or a milestone in our country or even globally, right? So we have a spreadsheet for that, which we get a lot of our ideas, especially because we want to uplift all of the cultures and marginalized communities that we can. And then one of our recent things that Christin implemented that I think is really great is a program checklist that actually help us follow along some of the guidelines we've set for our program. So that can be anywhere from, trying to do a head count of how many people who attended, or also just making sure that any of the materials that we have collected for that program is then added into our education hub. And Kristin's going to explain a little bit more about that later. Lastly, I just want to say that something that's really helped us, especially going into the beginning of this year, is we started having point persons in small groups. So I talked about brainstorming a little bit, and every meeting we would then try to brainstorm a little bit of the programs and things that we would be involved in. And we felt like it started to take up pretty much all of the meeting that we had. So we started having these point persons who would then lead small groups that could concentrate on a particular program or a particular initiative, so that it had some type of leadership to it within the committee. And then when we came to the actual committee meeting, we could spend that time just discussing through what that small group and that point person had kind of come up with. That way we weren't kind of starting from scratch. But we then again, all together kind of make a decision like, this is what we're gonna run with, or we just encourage the point persons and the small groups that, you know, they have good ideas and great ideas. So that's something that's helped save time. And it could be simple as an email. It doesn't have to be a meeting with the small groups. It can be that small just to start the conversation. And I just like to make this huge point at every step. We're checking in on our experiences. How did it feel to present that information? Because we want to make sure that the experiences are great for us as facilitators, as the people who are coordinating this, as well as our participants. Here I have linked the presentation that I've been referring to, the recording, the slides, and the handouts that gives you more information and a little bit more detail than we will give in this presentation because we already did it previously. And so any of the descriptions, all the things that Adreonna's going to talk about, and even what Christin's going to talk about, you will find at least in that recording, the slides, or particularly the handout. So our first prompt that we have here, and again, I'm just going to take maybe one or two people if you want to unmute yourselves or type into the chat. Are there any initiatives, events, or community connections that would inspire you to create a team to implement ongoing DEI programs? So our inspiration to you is to build a collective. Does anyone have any ideas of what could maybe
Hello.
inspire? Yeah, hi, Jenna, yes.
Hi. Oh, you said my name correctly too. Thank you. I'm in the Concord Cabarrus area, and I would be really interested in connecting with libraries outside of our community. I truly believe that we have some really powerful things that are happening outside of our community that we can really and truly learn from, and that are already established. I'm all about working smarter, not harder. So I would love to, connect with those libraries that have established DEI programs and that we can actually implement here, since we're so close in community as well, and we don't have to reinvent the wheel.
Yes, that was actually my point I was going to make for this slide is, use anybody at your organization in your community. I think for some smaller or rural communities, think to like, what your city or town has implemented, or anybody who's working in that area, any nonprofits that may be working in that, and then surrounding communities. You basically took the idea out of my mouth, like a neighbor county or the next largest cities, which, hey, if you're in Cabarrus, you're right down the street from UNC Charlotte. So we would love to work with you if that's something you might want to do, just to either get inspiration or, maybe connect with some faculty on our campus that might be able to help you with some initiatives. So I think that's a great idea. Did anyone else have a comment?
This is Chastity Stanfield. I got my hand raised, so I'm not sure if you see it or not. But anyway, I was thinking, since, if you guys can hear me okay,
Yeah.
that since the president has officially decided on Juneteenth as a federal holiday, we had, where I live at, near Burlington, this place called Green Level had a whole Juneteenth celebration. And that's something that, since now it's going to be a federal recognized holiday, is something that, we could get together and bring the community in and start doing bigger celebrations like people do for 4th of July, make it big like that as well.
I completely agree, Chassie, and that's what I couldn't think of earlier. We did just a short program last year on Juneteenth, and one of the videos we watched was about the fight to make that a national holiday. So I think that is wonderful. If you can connect with the people who organized that Juneteenth holiday celebration there, that might be your first thing to kind of mobilize around and put some action behind. I think that's great. And then bring it into your library if you can. All right, and then we had a couple of people in the chat. It looks like our library system has partnered with it looks like Compass, GLCC to facilitate several Pride Month activities. I think that's great, Doris. And then Liza, pre-COVID, we had a popular annual intercultural fair. Hope it resumes in 2022. This would be a perfect opportunity for our library to get involved. I think that is completely right along what we were thinking here. And hopefully this prompt will inspire more people and more ideas. And this will be a prompt that you will use in your breakout rooms later. So jot this down. We'll share it later, of course. And if you have any more ideas, please share them in the breakout rooms. Now we are going to transition to the next section.
Thanks, Angel. Hi, I'm Adriana, and I'll be talking a little bit about the programs that the Diversity Committee does at Atkins Library. And first, we're going to talk about our Conversations That Matter, which is a facilitated conversation around DEI topics. And some examples of our past ones include issues affecting Indigenous communities, which was one of the conversations that matter was a little bit different because we had a speaker from the Urban Education Department, Dr. Brittany Hunt, to talk to us about Indigenous issues, and then invisible disabilities, and then disparities of COVID-19, which is just to name a few. The Conversations That Matter is a more facilitated conversation, and it's usually about an hour and some change, and it doesn't take too long, and people get to, talk about the issues and, say their comments. Another program that we have is The More You Know, which is a short presentation, usually 10 to 15 minutes, that's held at the end of our monthly all staff meetings. And it's usually about a recent event or a topic, or sometimes it's about a commemorative month. The More You Know, which we didn't have an all staff meeting, but was in a video format, was sent out via email to library all staff, and that was about celebrating Asian American Pacific Islander Month. I think I got the acronym right. And sometimes those topics also range from things like Juneteenth that Angel mentioned, and also National Deaf History Month. Our Watch With Me program is another one that's pretty fun, and it's not just the conversation. We're watching video content, and then we're talking about it afterwards. The last event that we had, the last Watch With Me that we had was about the documentary Change the Subject, where Dartmouth students lobbied to have the subject heading Illegal Aliens removed from Library of Congress. So if you haven't watched that, it's actually pretty great, and it's very, very interesting and timely, especially for our profession. And then lastly, our article of the month is another facilitated conversation, but it's completely virtual. Christin will talk about this a little later, but it's housed in our education hub on Canvas. And basically we pick an article, we talk about it, and then people can do like a discussion board kind of thing underneath it. And we also have special events. So sometimes we have topics or events that don't necessarily fall into the format or category of our other established programs. So we just host another event. An example of one that we recently had was about learning about white nationalism on campus, and that was a lunch and learn kind of event. So it was held during the lunch hour. People could talk about it. We had one of our committee members to do that program. And then another example of a special event is when we collaborated with CAPS on campus, which is the Counseling and Psychological Services Department. There's so many acronyms. And then the Staff Development Committee at Atkins to discuss taking care of your mental health while working from home. COVID was really hard for everybody. And then making that transition from seeing people every day to not having that much interaction was really hard. So just trying to give people ways that they can take care of their mental health, but also thrive. Next slide, please. All right, so these are a selection of our programs. They're, the little decals, banners, the flyers, I guess, for our past events. And as Angel mentioned earlier, we try to cover a broad range of topics and then encourage committee members to present on what they're passionate about or what they feel, or a subject where they feel they can learn about it and then adequately talk about it or facilitate a discussion. I also like to point out on the banner for The More You Know, we have a really awesome subcommittee of the diversity subcommittee. So there's 3 subcommittees, and they dedicate their time to creating banners and other signage around the library to recognize commemorative months and holidays based on the spreadsheet that one of our colleagues made. And it's really helpful because sometimes there's events that we don't know about, or there's, just like Black Music History Month. I had no idea about that until I saw it on the spreadsheet, and I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. But yes, this is just an example of the different array of programs that we have to offer. And if you ever have a question about any of these, feel free to talk to us. Next slide. All right, so now we'll talk about facilitating these conversations because these topics are really challenging to talk about, because not only are they, some of them are considered political, but they also sometimes, and there are sometimes things that people from historically marginalized backgrounds identify with. Because it comes from a personal place, sometimes it's really hard to talk about and not take things personally when people say certain things. So we like to set ground rules for our programs that require a lot of facilitation. So the conversations that matter, and the article of the month, because the article of the month is a little bit different because people type things and you can kind of see it. So we try to apply all of these ground rules to those. We have about 8 to 10 ground rules, but I only go over 3 because I feel like they're the most important. But you can find the list of all the ground rules on the presentation that Angel shared earlier and also on that handout sheet. So the first is Vegas rules. What happens in the space stays in the space. We encourage participants to talk about the subjects broadly, but not talk about particular things that people may have said. This just creates a comfortable environment where people don't feel like they have anything, where people feel like what they have to say isn't taken out of context. And the second ground rule is regard people's lived experiences as true. It's important during sessions not to discount someone else's experience just because it's something that you may not have dealt with in your own life. Not only could this potentially be gaslighting, but it also discourages that person from sharing their story, again, in that kind of format. The third and last rule that I'll cover is making sure that everyone is able to engage in the conversation as much or as little as they would like. In addition to this, making sure that commenters are speaking to everyone in the group and not necessarily just the person who originated the comment. And this prevents a sort of back and forth that may happen and can cause conflict. The next thing I'm going to talk about is our best practices. Angel mentioned this earlier. We have a list of kind of a step-by-step what to do if you decide to facilitate the program. Since we kind of rotate or alternate presenters, we try to have the standard that all members are expected to follow. And this is sending out the calendar invitation to the library group, reminders to the listserv. I'm good for saying that I'll go to something, especially a webinar, and then I'll look and it's like, oh, I forgot. So making sure that you're sending out reminders, creating a presentation, adding a list of resources to the end so that participants can read after the program is over with. DEI is not, just going to a webinar. You have to make sure that you're always learning, you're always engaging and learning more. And allowing time for deliberation and reflection. This last piece is especially important because sometimes at the end of a presentation, we feel like we need to fill the empty silence that happens at the end. And it's really just people sitting with their thoughts and kind of understanding what they heard. So making sure that you're comfortable with that silence and kind of leaning into it instead of trying to fill it with a bunch of words, kind of like what I'm doing. Slide 4, please. Well, next slide. All right, so now we're to our second prompt. What are some DEI priorities that matter to your organization or community, and how can these be translated into a suite of programs? And feel free to open up your mic if that's more comfortable for you, or you can talk in the chat. Are the facilitation guidelines in the shared information as well? Yes, they are. Let me see if I can put handouts in the chat. But feel free to open your mic if you would like. Thank you, Tabitha.
I think sorry, I'm gonna just chime in here. I feel like in terms of DEI, you know, there's a lot I still don't understand, and maybe a lot of people don't understand when it comes to opportunities within employment, negotiating salaries, things like that. Understanding maybe how to shift policies and practices that have played out a certain way for a long time, and how to move it towards a more equitable capacity. I know for myself, these are the priorities that I'm constantly seeking out, and you're helping me to realize they could be a suite of programs. So yeah, just anything that can help with understanding how to navigate the nuances of organizational culture that may not reflect DEI priorities, even though there's a lot of discussion around it.
Yes. Amrita, I hope I'm saying your name right.
Yeah, it's Amrita.
Amrita.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that's super important. Like talking about DEI as an umbrella and not just necessarily like specific topics, but how do we bring that into our work, like like you said, our organizational culture. And I haven't necessarily we haven't necessarily kind of gone into that or gone into that avenue, but I think that the more programming that we do and the more that we make DEI like something that everyone is expected to do, it'll kind of naturally seep its way into the culture. Not saying that there's not going to be, you know, some instances where you're going to have to push against policy because change is uncomfortable. But yeah, I definitely agree.
Well, and how Angel worded it in the chat box is exactly kind of where my mind is going. You know, I think it's in the past, it was taboo to talk about things like this, but it became taboo because the people, you know where I'm going with this, but I don't need to say that, but you get what I'm saying. It's, if we don't talk about the power imbalance, it continues to exist, and it normalizes the imbalance versus actually like doing something about it. So yeah, it's uncomfortable, but it's necessary. And I think libraries, we have a significant platform, especially public libraries, and an opportunity to really harness the power of the people and in the community. And so, yeah, this is really inspiring. Thank you.
Yeah. Jenna, you have your hand raised.
Yes, I was just gonna say, I think even piggyback off of what was just said, we have to, in this county, I feel like we have to move back and start from the uncomfortable piece. There's a lot of fear around being uncomfortable, and so no change is happening. And when that happens, you don't grow in comfort. And so trying to figure out a way for my organization and community to get to a place of being okay in that uncomfortability and trying to shift to a growth mindset, I think is a want to happen, but it's not currently right now, and this could just be my very jaded view. I feel right now that we're just a DEI as a check mark. And so currently we do have a DEI committee in the county, but I want one in the library because I believe the library sees people differently and we address things differently. And so trying to figure out how we can still mesh the two, but also get people uncomfortable and feel be okay with that uncomfortability. So I think the priorities of our organization are like introducing it and letting y'all know we're doing it. Check. But I want it to be purposeful and intentional. And I think we're gonna have to move back to how do we address these conversations in our uncomfortable piece. And I think that the conversations that matter is very huge. We don't talk enough about the people that are different from us in this community. And so I'm interested in how can that be implemented in this space.
Awesome. Yeah, it's definitely important to lean into that discomfort. And I think that like starting a diversity committee at your library and then maybe having somebody from that committee serve on the county committee. And then that way you're all in conversation, but definitely getting some conversations going would be beneficial. We have some comments in the chat. Cindy says, I haven't researched this yet, but over the weekend, I had a brainstorm to include DEI in our student worker training, and I wonder if anyone created content for that. That's really interesting. I don't think we've created anything for student worker centered. All of our programming is open to student employees as well, but I don't think we've targeted them specifically. So maybe that's something that we can brainstorm on, well, we can talk about in the future for them. So that's a really good idea. And if you happen to launch that, like, let us know how that goes, because I think student voices are important as well. And Liza says, get comfortable with discomfort. Yeah, Jenna made some really good points. It's awesome. Thanks y'all for a really great discussion.
We had one more comment that I just wanted to pull out here before I move into our Education Hub section. We had a comment that we ran across the problem that workers who tried to talk about DEI issues at home were getting pushback, sometimes very stressful pushback from family members. Has anyone done anything with that? So that's really an interesting point that I'm afraid I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name, but I believe it might be Nisha. Nisha. Sorry, Nisha. That's a great point, and I think that's something that a number of people at in our library have expressed, that they've encountered these same sort of situations at home, maybe when they've talked to a family member and have had pushback. And some of the feedback that we've gotten from folks in our library is that by having these discussions at work, they feel a little better prepared to have those discussions at home. So I don't know if anybody else here today has anything to add to that, but please feel free.
A couple years ago, I learned from Christin Lampkowski and Jody Gray at the ALA Odd Loss Outreach Diversity Literacy something office. And they had an entire training on how to frame conversations. And this was a big turning point for me to learn how to connect the conversation to history, data, facts, which then, like, I hate saying it, it kind of takes away the emotion from it, because these conversations can be so polarizing, you know. But I found that learning how to frame the conversation helped me personally and professionally to navigate conversations about, you know, I can remember last summer, my sister was irritated with the various statues across the United States coming down. And now my sister is not a Confederate advocate. She thought, you know, oh, this is history that's being erased. And so it was so interesting. I was able to help her understand. I'm like, well, why are we celebrating this kind of history? You know, if you go to Germany, you don't see statues of Hitler being erected. Like, this is kind of, I'm giving obviously I gave her a very polar extreme opposite kind of example, but it really helped me to talk to her. And she ended up coming around. She was, you know, wasn't the point of the conversation, but she actually was listening, because I was not fueled or heated by, oh, well, your opinion is different from mine. It was more like, well, did you consider X, Y, and Z and how that can affect other people? So framing that has helped me quite a bit.
That's such a great point, and sort of transitions well into our next topic of our Education Hub, and how we really wanted to create some sort of central place for these topics to be discussed, for resources to be gathered. And Angel was adding to our comment in the chat to say that resources are empowering for people to have these conversations. We all need to be, as Angel has said, ready to protect ourselves and do as much or as little as our mental well-being can allow. So I just want to remind everybody here that it's wonderful that you're here. We appreciate you being here. We appreciate everyone who's working on these topics. But there are times when we might need to step back, and we've had those conversations within our committee as well, to say, let's give ourselves compassion. Let's give ourselves space sometimes to maybe not push ourselves as far as we might want to or might think that we need to, but to be willing to protect ourselves so that we have the energy to continue going forward with this work. So yes, Olivia has agreed with setting boundaries is so important. So for our education hub here, I want to tell you about how we have started to gather the information that we've been creating and sharing within our library in this education hub. So Angel, go ahead and jump to our next slide. So we created this centralized engagement location, and this came out of, was inspired by a couple of different things that we were all engaging with, or various people in our committee were engaging with. There was an ACRL webinar that happened last year called "Why Do Most Diversity Trainings Fail?" by Dr. Nicole Robinson. And that focused on how these one-off sessions, these one-off trainings, this hour or maybe even an afternoon where we talk about something and then we all feel like, oh, we got the sticker to say we understand LGBTQ and now we are a safe space. That's not really enough. That's a great starting point, but we need to stay engaged and we need to keep working and learning and having these conversations in order for change to really happen. And also a number of us read an article called "Drops of Diversity: How a Small Academic Library is Working to Increase Cultural Competence." And that was an article that focused on a library using a newsletter type resource to share information with their staff at their library. So we got to thinking about what are some ways that we can keep people engaged and what are some ways that we can share information beyond the programs that we're doing, because we knew that a lot of people were coming to our programs, but we also knew that there were people who maybe weren't coming to our programs or weren't feeling comfortable speaking up during those programs. So we created this hub. At our campus, we have Canvas as our learning management system. So within this system, we were able to create a course or a project where we put in our information from all of our programs. So the visual that you see here is our main page. It gives folks who are coming to the hub for the first time a little information about what's there and why, and then it links them to content from each of our programs. Canvas allows us to break things out into what are called modules. So those modules there are the topics of each of our different types of programs. And we have shared all of the content from those programs within there. And that can include copies of our slides. That can include any videos that we may have shown. For example, for Watch With Me, we'll share a link to the video or a place for someone to go back and watch that video. We'll share recordings if there are recordings. Most of our programs we do not record because we want that to be a contained space, and as Adreonna said, those Vegas rules apply. But in the case of The More You Know, she mentioned that our most recent one, we went ahead and made a short recorded presentation like we would have presented at our all staff meeting. We went ahead and put that video into this hub so that folks can go back there. They can watch it again. They can easily find it. They can find all of that content in one place. And we've been building this out as we realize more things that we can share in different ways that we can approach things. We have created a resources module where we have things like our diversity statement, the diversity statement that others on campus have made, and some guidelines for how to use or when to use the land acknowledgement and land acknowledgement wording. All of that information we've put into the hub here so that people can find it in one easy location. And then we are also in discussions thinking about how we can add accessibility and disability resources to this hub. So we're working with our accessibility committee to identify some resources that we can add to here, so that, again, that's another bit of DEI, or DEIA, as we hope to change it to, so that people have that all here in this location. So we, like I said, we have used Canvas as our location for all of this, but that's not the only option that's out there. So that leads us into our next prompt here. This prompt is, what technology platforms can you use to elevate DEI content? Would a monthly newsletter be a great place to start? So what might you have available? Are there any things that you have at your library that you're currently using for DEI, or for other programs that you think could transition into DEI?
Hey, my name is Katie Hoffler. I work at Wake Tech, and we have a library diversity group. It's a really small group. And what we've done is just, we have LibGuides. And so each month we'll have a different theme and talk about what collections we have. Maybe if there's, like for Pride, we have some events going on in the area and things like that. So that's kind of where we started.
That's great. We also use LibGuide, and that was one of the options that we discussed as well. So that's definitely a great place to start. And it's how we've shared some other content around perhaps like specific events or specific topics. We might have a LibGuide on that topic. So yeah, that's a great option. And if you don't have something that you're currently using, or you're not really sure where to get started on this aspect of DEI, this is something that we'll come back to in our discussion groups as well. So maybe we can all ask questions, and we can brainstorm ideas if people are looking for ways to share content. We have a comment in the chat from Jennifer saying, I work at UNC Libraries, and we started with a newsletter, and we use intranet sites for all staff to access. So that's a great point as well that Jennifer brings up, is for us, for our Canvas information, similar to like you're saying, your intranet site. This is an internally accessible vault of information for people. So this isn't, while we do have some things that we might share more widely with the broader community, with the campus, the information that's in our hub is, it is only available to those of us who work at the library who can log in. And that's how we were able to have things like our article of the month, where we have an online discussion. We purposefully wanted to have somewhere where not everybody could access it. It would just be the folks in our library who would be able to access that discussion board and add comments and ask questions there. So that's something to consider too, about what level of access do you want to give to folks in your library and outside of your library when you're sharing this information. Also have a comment saying, I work for a system that subscribes to Black Freedom Struggles in the United States database, which is a website featuring select primary sources, documents related to critical people and events in African American history. That's great. Do you have a way that you make that resource known to your community? Do you promote that in any particular way?
I can't speak for everybody in the system I work for, but I know for myself, I work in outreach, and I center a lot of programming around the database. Or like if I'm working with young adults, okay, let's do a scavenger hunt. Let's learn about XYZ or utilize these features in it. But, you know, it's just rather than directing everyone to Google and looking for information, it's got a lot of credible, reputable articles in there. And so I just try to incorporate it into programming.
That's great. Yeah. And thinking about, like, we have at our library, we have the human power to create some of our own resources and content. But if you don't have that, if you're a smaller library, if you're an individual doing this work, that's a great example of finding resources that are out there and elevating them as a way for you to do this work.
Is Canva not, that's not for everyone, right? Like everybody doesn't have access to it, right?
For Canvas, yes, that is just at our university, it's sort of like our Blackboard, our system that students use for online coursework and things like that. So it's not something that everybody has available, but other schools may have something similar, or other library systems may have something like LibGuides, or maybe even the ability to make a Google site or something like that, that you could store information in.
Okay, we have Microsoft Teams that's become huge right now. So I'll be interested in, I wonder if we can create groups, because outside, that's how we did some of our book clubs too. We invited them to in our Microsoft Teams. So could we create a platform through Teams, like a group, and then add resources that way?
Yeah. Oh, that's a great idea. I'm personally not terribly familiar with Microsoft Teams. I know that it's used by a lot of places, but that sounds like a great avenue for you to explore. Maybe a subsite to your intranet is what Angel is suggesting. Drops of Diversity crew used Google Sites, which is free. So those are some great examples. Well, we'll move on to our last little parts here. We wanted to take a moment here to give you all a note about assessment. So I will be very upfront here and say, when we started our work at Atkins Library, we were not thinking about assessment. We were thinking about creating these programs, providing opportunities for all of us to engage with each other, and assessment came as an afterthought. So if you're getting started, this is our plug to say, think about assessment now and think about trying to include that as you're creating and building out whatever your offerings are at your library. We have done a little bit of qualitative assessment so far. We have started keeping track of the number of participants that we have at our various events, just so we can get an idea of sort of what percentage of our library is actually attending our programs. And then we, over the course of the last almost 2 years now that we've been working on this, we have started to do some qualitative assessment by getting feedback via Google Forms. So we created a Google form first for our Conversations That Matter to give people an opportunity to tell us what they liked about the program, what they took away from the program, what they thought we missed, and also to give us suggestions for future programs. And we have added sharing that Google form into our events checklist. So another plug for our events checklist that we find really helpful in planning, just having an idea of all the different things that you might need to include, from promoting your program down to sharing those feedback forms and getting people's input during and after your programs and events, so that you can have good information to work from going forward. We've also found that there just weren't great examples of assessment around DEI programs. There doesn't seem to be, from our research, there doesn't seem to be anybody who has a good idea of how to measure the impact of these programs. So we are thinking about how we can influence that and try to start to measure the impact at our library. And so that leads us into our final prompt here before our breakout rooms, where we want to ask, how do you gather feedback from your staff and community? And are there ways, formally or informally, that you assess your DEI work? And in this case, we have been thinking for our own work going forward, we've been thinking about other ways that we assess other programs and other activities at the library, and how those may transition or change for assessment of our DEI work. So I invite you all, if you'd like to share in the chat or open up your mics, any ways that you currently assess your DEI programs, or just right now as we're brainstorming and thinking other ways of assessment that you might transition into this, this venue. It does seem a little quieter on this one.
I think this is a complicated one because really don't, I think we all, how to solicit feedback depends on the type of program, right? Or I guess in my head. So formally, like we can always count the people that are coming in. But like I was thinking with the informal assessments of our DEI work, we can do passive programming. And with passive programming, sometimes it's just like, are you watching who's using it or not? But even if we do have a program, to maybe how well are we actually getting the information out there? So having them bring something or do something while they're at the program to say, okay, you actually got the flyer, you know what it's about, and come in and present or whatever we ask. So that's an informal assessment. And then how do we gather feedback from our staff and community? Our what are we at? What are we? We're a county. Our county does a lot of feedback forms, but we don't do them enough in the library. And so I think that we need to do that. Lib Wizard, I want to know what that's at.
Yeah, those are great points, and we're getting some suggestions in the chat of different types of ways that people gather their assessment. We have Google Forms, getting feedback after each program via Google Forms. We have LibGuide link to faculty. We sent a LibGuide link to faculty association meeting asking for feedback. We had 2 faculty members make a couple of comments. Our Lib Wizard suggestion said, we use Lib Wizard, but I would think you could get creative about how to gauge assessment with projects like this. How many clicks through to assigned articles, etc. Focus groups, social media engagement. Those are great suggestions. And that sort of focus group idea is something we've been thinking about, potentially holding sort of a forum. We're planning that now for later in the summer for us to hold a forum at our library where people will have the opportunity to come in and share their thoughts with us. For the folks that might not want to fill out a form or might not know exactly what to say on the form, we can come in, ask them some questions, give them an opportunity to just share whatever thoughts they have. And then social media engagement is really interesting. That's not something that we have thought about. So I think I'm making a note of that as something for us to think about as well. And Lib Wizard, someone asked if that's something that you can purchase. The answer was yes. It's from the same people that make LibGuides. So for anybody who uses LibGuides, Lib Wizards might be an add-on from SpringShare that you can consider. And then we had one additional person who said Qualtrics surveys. That's another resource that we have available at our library as well. It's a surveying platform that allows a little more anonymity, perhaps, than some other platforms. And so that is something we've used for some other surveys in our library and something that we're considering as well for our assessment with our DEI programs. So thank you, everybody, for your great thoughts on that and your great feedback. You've given us some ideas, so we appreciate that as well. And so just a final thought before we transition into our breakout rooms. At our library, we have this lofty goal. We want to create transformative trainings to change thoughts and processes in our library, campus, broader community, and hopefully employees' personal lives. So this relates directly back to where we started with our cultural humility. What our goals of our programming really is for our staff to have a space to tackle these challenging topics, to talk through the problems and inequities that exist, and then hopefully be able to broaden that out onto our campus community and have our library employees take this information home and implement it into their individual lives as well. So we really just have this as an underlying driver in all of the work that we are doing. And we hope that our conversation today has given you some great ideas and some inspiration to move forward with this work in some new and different ways. And so now I think we are ready to transition into our breakout rooms. We have this slide here that has all of our reflection questions that we've gone through so far today. And we're going to break out into our rooms and have an opportunity to talk through anything that we didn't get covered in here, and also an opportunity to talk about other things if there are other things that we want to bring up.
And I just want to make a quick note that these are all the questions we talked about in the discussion, but feel free to bring up your own topics or anything that you're kind of working through. We mentioned that our brainstorming sessions is how we kind of come up with our ideas. And so it doesn't have to be direct answers to these questions. It could be really what is particular to your community. The last thing I'll say too, while I put up the thanks slide, so thank you everyone for attending. And if you have to leave, that's totally fine and can't attend a breakout room, is that these are internal programs. So we kind of mentioned earlier, Kristen mentioned that we're using Canvas so we can have a little bit more of a intimate discussion with our coworkers. We do plan to try to have at least one or two community-wide, campus-wide programs a year, but we do have other apparatuses that do those programs as well. But we felt like, you know, at some point we would like to share something, but we don't want to lose that intimacy. So that might be something to think about as well. If you have a team for internal and a team for external, or a team that does both, or again, it could just be a combination or collaboration with people in your community. So I just wanted to point that out, that we are 99% internal in what that we do and what we consider doing. So thank you, everyone. If you have any questions, our emails are on the screen. We really appreciate your time today, and we'll see some of you in the breakout rooms.
All right, folks, we are going to split up into 3 breakout rooms. I will automatically put you in a breakout room, and I will turn off the recording now.